This is our podcast, and it's called Life is Better with You in It. And with me today, I have Dr. Ryann Hanna, who is one of my most favorite people in the world. And when we talk about what life is better with you in it, she's one of those people. So welcome to the show, Ryann.
I'm so excited that you're doing this. And it feels really good to know that I'm one of your favorite people because you're the sunshine of my weeks.
I love that. I love that. And we are here to talk today about this thing, right? This thing that you've been walking me through the past, year or so now that I've been doing the business and kind of
Feels
being
like
like, hey, I need some direction here. Because there is definitely a difference when you move from being an employee to an employer and your own owner of your life and what that looks like for you. So, tell me and tell our listeners about intuitive leadership.
yeah, it's a really interesting concept to me because, I was first kind of clued into this idea when you and I were working together. And so I would say maybe 7 years ago, it was really obvious to me that there were certain types of decision making that were valued more than others, right? And I always found it interesting because when you go and recruit somebody, and you know this better than anybody, you want to know what their education is, you want to know what their experience is, and you ask these in-depth behavioral questions to select someone to understand, hey, is their past experience going to give us a good idea of what we expect of them to move forward, right? Which is awesome. I love that. But then they get into the job and you want them to like logic the heck out of that job.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost is like saying, I could have just hired someone that's like great at logic and great at data analysis for any job if that's really all it takes to make a decision. But we know that that's not true because we hire people with deep experience because that helps people make better decisions, right? And at the core of what intuitive leadership is it understands that experience hones instinct. And that instinct is another data point in making decisions. And so, if you want a really well rounded approach to making decisions, if you have to make decisions quickly, if you need to consider qualitative information and not just numbers and not just logic, which often we do, right, with people and experiences, these are not things that you can just logic your way out of.
Yeah,
You
years of
have to
experience.
really yeah, you have to rely on that experience, that instinct, because that's more information to make great decisions. And so it was really shocking to me to hear that there are people that just don't value that. And the more experience I had in leadership roles, leading teams, leading people, and getting into my research, I found that this is such a valuable leadership quality that we don't spend enough time developing in other people as they're coming up.
Yeah. I read a book. It was a book about burnout. I can leave it here in the comments later or put it up with the podcast, but it talked about just like, everybody's saying, especially for women, like, we're fine, we're fine, we're fine. And like not really listening to that inner voice. And so, when you and I started working together and you're throwing these big words, right? Intuitive leadership. What the hell is that? I'm going to have to Google it. And then I Googled what intuition was. And it was just basically knowing something immediately without having any other like logic to place behind it. And so there have been times where I've made decisions about hiring where I just know a person is a fit. I don't know that I don't have a logical explanation, right? Like they may have less years of background than ideal, but I will go and fight for that person because I'm like instinctively, I just know that this person is a fit for the company. There's no other way around it. And so now in my own business doing recruiting and working with job seekers, there are people who I instinctively know who are a fit. And so listening to that and listening to this whole intuition that I carry with me every day, right? I make decisions as a parent, I make decisions as a wife, as just a me. Being able to hone in and work on this craft has been awesome with you so far. So that's why I have to have you on the podcast because we've got to talk to other women and men even about it because, I know men typically, right? Like if I were to stereotype it, use that whole logic, but there is something to be said about that intuition and that instinct to act on things. And so I've got a couple questions for you.
Yeah.
And so what made you explore this path into the coaching that you do and building up leaders?
Yeah. You mentioned a couple of things that that kind of lead to it. And I don't even think what got me here. So it's just funny that you mentioned things like how men think about it or stereotypes, right? When I started my dissertation, um, part of being a researcher and kind of getting that stamp of approval and education to be a researcher, you don't just create science to create science. The expectation is that you also contribute to social responsibility. And you know me for a really long time. And so for me, I cared very much about gender equality, right? And so I knew I wanted my research to impact female leaders specifically. And that was a road I wanted to explore of like, hey, what are some things as female leaders that like we don't yet know as a science that can start to be applied? You know, science tends to precede practitioner activity by like 10 years. And so I know if I can lay some additional foundation in science today, that could help women 10 years down the road uh, have more equality in leadership positions. And so I was really passionate about that. And you have to always have some theory as a foundation for your research. And so I came across a theory that surprisingly in years of college education I'd never heard of, called role congruity theory. And it's this idea that there's a double penalty for women. And it shows up a lot in leadership positions because if you act like a woman, that or feminine, I should say, if you act feminine, that is viewed as less than. But if you, as a woman, act more masculine, you're viewed as fake. And so no
There's
matter
no
what you
win.
do,
There's no
you can't
win.
win. Right. And we see this a
Shocker.
lot in leadership, right? Because what do you do? Do you lead with feminine and be authentic? Or do you integrate more masculine traits and be considered fake, right? And so what do you do then? How do you become more successful? And I went down this road, and it was this callback to my very first sociology class where we learned about schemas. And schemas is this idea that like you don't wake up every day and the world's brand new to you, right? Every day you're putting together all these little pieces of experience that build your perception of the world.
Yeah.
One of the downsides of that is stereotypes, right? You experience certain things from your point of view and you can have a stereotype. And that can be largely negative and impact people in not so positive ways, right?
Yeah.
The other side of how you form schemas is that you gain instinct, right? And so doing now my dissertation work, 10 years down the road, um, you can't talk about everything, right? I mean, the thing I wrote, it was almost 200 pages. You can't write everything about everything. You have to have this tiny little narrow scope. And so I had this one specific focus area that just had to meet, essentially university requirements, if I'm being honest with you. But where I feel like that led to thoughts in my mind was more around how do we now think about what are the things that are valuable that women bring to the table that are inherently feminine, right? Because if we're going to think about being authentic, that's something that's important to me. I don't want to be fake and logic my way out of things. That doesn't feel right for me as a leader. And
Too
so
much
if
work
the
too for me. For me, too much work to be like super logical. I can give you some
tired,
logic. I just can't. I can't logic all of it.
exhausting, right? I don't need to end my day feeling that burnout that you mentioned, right? Like I can't do that. Can't do that all day. Doesn't feel like who I am. And so if I am going to lead with these feminine qualities, what might that be? And in a lot of my research, I actually interviewed a lot of men about how they valued female leaders. And this tangent that my mind went off of outside of the dissertation is, man, a lot of men were able to indicate that women do lead different. And they were able to talk about some of the specific value that women bring to the table when we have more diverse leadership teams. And one of the things that they did talk about is this idea of being more communal and more instinctual and working off more of, we like to pretend like women are more emotional. And in these conversations, right, which is hysterical. But in these conversations, they actually were seeing the value of emotion. And they weren't speaking about it negatively. They were talking about how this can be a valuable thing. And in my mind, this all kind of came back to intuition and intuitive leadership. And I had this wild thought to myself of, man, if we could really help people understand the value of intuition and leadership, then maybe women can be viewed as equal leaders.
Yeah, that's mind blowing, especially to the whole emotion piece of it and like how like emotion actually like is not a negative thing. We do use it to make decisions, but it comes from that area of like that instinct and knowing things immediately. There are some things that I know immediately about people or about a situation, and I know exactly what to do. And then I sit there and go, well, are you fine? Are you fine? Is everything fine? Who do I need to explain this to? Does anybody need to hear this? Or you'll like, you'll logic check it with somebody else that you trust, right? And so I think like as you grow as a woman leader, right, in this world today, I feel like there's this balance of like knowing things and acting on it instinctually, but then I'm trying to grow it at the same time. So I'll find people that I trust and be like, hey, this is what I already know. And they're like, well, you sound pretty sure about it. I'm like, I do, even if it's going to be the wrong choice. Like, I feel like that's the mistake that you've got to make anyway. So I
Yeah,
love that
think
take.
about like just even animals, right? Like we don't say that animals make bad decisions because they have instinct, right? Like an animal has an emotional reaction because there's danger, right? So
Yeah.
you might see fear. Fear is an emotion. That's because there's danger, right? You might see an animal act with like this high urgency because they're hungry and they're hunting, right? Like we're animals, no matter how you slice and dice it, like that's in us too. And so emotions are really just an indication of something that's happening. It's
Yeah.
happening within us, and we have to know where that's coming from. And so I think it's really important to know that when you have an emotional reaction, or you just know something, you have that gut feeling that people talk about, that's your instinct kicking in. And that is something that is honed over time. And when you listen to it, I think you're really honoring all of the experience that you bring to the table. And when you have to logic your way out of it, I almost feel like you're undermining all of the hard work and experiences that you've had in your life.
Yeah, makes sense. I feel like the more I practice it and the more I listen to the instinct and the knowing that I have, the better choices I continue to make, right? I'm going to flub it along the way, or there's going to be something that I perceived wrong. Um, but over time, I've listened to this gut instinct and it does not prove me wrong, right? I mean, I'm sitting in a house right now that I walked into and I didn't I didn't like this house.
Bad vibes.
And this room, I redid this whole room. And I didn't like this house when I walked in, but then it was like, all right, we'll like the lake. We like the garage. We like the lake. We like the garage. All right, we'll make this work. And then just shit just started to storm roll. So like, where would we have been had I come in and been like, I know that this is not our house. I don't know. But I think there were lessons to be learned. I know how to do, drywall and stuff now, so that's good. All right. All right. How do you use intuition in your day to day and what you bring with you when it comes to work?
Yeah. So how I use it in my day to day and how I use it at work are honestly really similar. I'm a big believer that like how you do anything is how you do everything. Shout out to anyone that is on a Peloton that knows where that quote is coming from. But that's like
That's
that's
not me. Not me.
shout out to Jess Sims. Um, I really truly believe that, and it's something that I just is constantly reinforced in things that I see of like if you're a hard worker, you work hard, right? If you know how to figure things out, you figure things out. There's certain things that I think uh, it's not your work persona, your life persona, and I'm a big believer that the more that you show up consistently in both, like the happier you'll be. So I don't try and like I used to put on a work face and then go home and put on a home face, and that's bullshit. I don't do that anymore. My face is my face. I show up
Yeah,
how I show up, right?
love
And
that.
so when it comes to intuition, I use it to just make well-rounded decisions and slow myself down. You know me, I can be very decisive and be very driving, right? Like
Yeah.
quick, 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 get something done, make a call, move on. Um,
Yeah, on to the next because we're in a hurry. On to the next.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so intuition allows me to go, okay, like what are all the things that I have to think about? Slow myself down a little bit, check in with my feelings. I'll be really transparent. I had to do 7 years of therapy to like name my feelings, not something I was raised to really like know and understand and like put a name on it and address it. And so I
Well,
had to learn
everything
that
was
as an
fine.
adult.
Everything
Yeah.
was fine. Yeah, everything's
And,
fine.
and I would always, I remember the first thing my therapist said was, you think about how you feel a lot. And I was like, ouch,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
right? That's not
Uh-huh.
cool. That feels great when you have a psych degree and a therapist has to tell you that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I had to learn these things as an adult, and it was really eye-opening, and it affects a lot of areas of your life, right? If you don't really know what you're feeling. And so I've been on this journey even personally for a super long time. I think I started this journey when I was in my mid 20s. And it allows me to slow down, name the feeling. Now, why? What about me and this situation evokes that? And now I'm making decisions off of all the information, and not just what's right in front of me. What's the thing that I absolutely know? I can really dig deeper into like who I am and what I need and want out of things. And now I'm making decisions that align with who I am, instead of just chasing what I think I want. Right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, especially work, right? We fall into this trap of like, I just want the next job. And I talk to leaders about self time. I just want the next job. Like, do you?
Mm-hmm.
Why? What about it? How does that work for the rest of your life? How does that lead to then the next thing that you want? Like, what do you really want down the road? What is
Mm-hmm.
actual success to you? What is really freedom to you? And when you start reverse engineering that, it's often just not that next thing. And so you have to make really thoughtful choices all the time. And I think instinct allows you to do that. I think being really intuitive and honing intuition allows you to slow down and make very thoughtful choices for yourself.
Yeah, that whole concept of being able to slow down. I feel like we're in such a world and a culture where, we see things on social media and it's real, right? It's like real life success and these people are making tons of money and they're so successful, but like you've even really had had me hone in on like what success looks like on me. Like slow down long enough and what does your body say about what you think success is? Like what do you think success is? What are you striving for? Because all the other decisions that you make are going to go towards that. And so I think our guts instinct and our intuitive leadership aspect is, I think, here to tell us to slow the F down for a second, to be like, what is my body saying about what's happening right now? And all the experience and everything I know, okay, that way I don't make those rash decisions. That's powerful, being able to slow down because we're in a world where like this is hustle culture. We gotta hustle. And I like to hustle. I love to hustle. But I can only hustle for so long to where I'm like, I'm not listening to what's happening around me and I'm making decisions that are not based off of all the information. So
Right. How do you know you're still running in the right direction? And so many things I hear about burnout, like, you know me, like there's a lot of things that you can put in front of me and I'm like, okay, moving on. Like I wrote a whole article early in my career about how I thought like most business books were awful. And in reality, they're all just the same book written different ways. And so I'm not big on all of these things that try to sell you something you don't need.
yeah.
But one thing that has always stuck out to me when we talk about burnout, and I guess it just resonates with me, and I hope it resonates with other people, is that when you're burnt out, it's not because you're working too hard, it's because you're not doing enough of the things that fill your cup.
Yeah.
And so that's the one thing I think hustle culture doesn't have enough of a thoughtfulness to it, is that it's just like hustle, hustle, hustle. And it's like, are you doing things that make you feel good and who you need to be? You can work your butt off towards something, and it doesn't even, quite frankly, need to be your passion. I think if it can be, that's amazing. And I love that for people that have figured out how to make money off of something they're passionate about. I think you can work really hard at a job you hate, but if you love your partner and you love your kids, or you love not having kids, and you eat the food that makes you feel good, and you go on trips to see places you think are beautiful, and when you wake up in your bedroom that's like your sanctuary, I think you can go work 8 hours at a day at a job you hate if it's putting money in the bank because you fill your cup.
Yeah.
And that's just a big area of hustle culture that we don't really take into consideration. And intuition will tell you that, right? Like it'll kick in and be like, you don't feel good. Your body is tense. You're making a weird face. You feel nauseous driving to the place you're driving to. You don't want to answer the phone. You don't want to check your voicemail, right? You have trouble sleeping. Your body is going to kick in and be like, And that's intuition at the end of the day.
I've been telling you I've got this book coming out of me, right? And I know that it's coming out of me and I've got to write these chapters and I've got this goal to like get it done in a certain amount of time. and I've got to hustle my ass to do it because I maintain a full-time job, and writing said book pays no dollars, right? I get no dollars for those hours, but I've got to write the book and I feel it coming out of me. And I remember one time very vividly driving. I had like written on my planner, right? Gonna write this morning. I'm gonna get 20 minutes in and it's gonna forward a chapter. And I'm driving to go do something for myself, just for myself. Not any of the kids, not running errand for Bill, but I'm just going by myself. And I had not written that morning, and my body was like, "Oh my gosh, like you are about to light up like a Christmas tree because you didn't do that one thing that filled your cup." And I think even if I were running a business that I didn't particularly like, but it made a lot of dollars, I would still be good, like as long as I did the writing in the morning, because that was the thing that I thought about all day. And even now, I don't even know what I drove for. I don't know where I went, but I know that I didn't write that day, and I knew exactly how I felt when I didn't. So,
Yeah,
mm.
absolutely.
All right, tell the listeners, right, of this podcast, Life is Better with You in It. Tell us two things that someone could start doing today to work on their intuition. What are two life hacks, we'll call them, or
Yeah,
intuition tips?
totally. I think self-reflection is a big one. And, we're touching on that, right? We're talking about reflective moments, but we're not calling it that. But self-reflection, right? And I don't think this is something where you have to like carve out time on your to-do list for self-reflection. This is not an ad
Meditate
to,
in silence.
yeah, this is something where you're building a muscle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you notice something inside you change, take a minute to think about it or even just acknowledge it, right? It may not even be thinking about it yet, but going, oh, something changed. Interesting, right? And then move along, right?
Yeah.
And the next time it happened, like, it's happening again. What's the same about that first time and this time? Interesting, right? Move along. And as you start building that muscle, you become more reflective of
Mm-hmm.
yourself. You start to recognize some of what that is and what that means and what it's trying to tell you. And I think that is foundational to honing your intuition, is like recognize it. You have to know you have it and see it in yourself and take time to be like, I know what that's about.
Well, in
So
a
I think that's
culture
the first
too,
one. The
like
second one,
the culture too, I feel like we are built to just move on to the next. We don't
yeah,
build in any time for self-reflection. It's like that made me feel weird. Ooh, gonna do something that makes me feel good. Right? Immediately. We're gonna always
yeah.
lean towards like
Or like,
you know
oh, I
what?
don't like feeling weird. Let me just push that down and go get a
Yeah.
Starbucks. Yeah.
Yeah, like go get a Starbucks and we're gonna like solve all the world's problems. Okay, we're gonna move on to the next one. Like I feel like that slowing down, that self-reflection, I feel like will be key for people.
Yeah. I mean, even if you think about like memes that you see, like I am such a researcher and a psychologist at heart, and like human behavior is so fascinating to me that like you can't even put a meme in front of me without me like also kind of like mentally dissecting it for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And so like you see these memes about like me strolling in 10 minutes late to work with like a coffee in my hand. And I'm like, because you don't want to be there. And then you got a coffee to make yourself feel good enough. And you needed the
Yes.
dopamine hit to show up to your
Yep.
job. Like, yo, because you hate your job or like you hate something about your life if you can't show up. And so like it's almost like a joke in our culture to some extent of
It
like,
is.
yeah, just shove those bad feelings down. You hear about quiet quitting, you hear about that. Like there's all these things of just like shove those negative feelings down and like try to do something that just makes you feel good instead. And it's like,
Yeah.
or we could figure out what the heck that means and
Yeah.
fix it.
And then get a
Yeah.
Starbucks and we reward ourselves for our self-reflection.
Right. Yeah. Go get like a $6 cold brew and feel good about yourself. And it doesn't have to just be your daily dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Um,
Love
yeah.
that.
And then I think the other thing, and this would be people that I think probably are more in like a traditional corporate environment, or entrepreneurs, or like this is probably a more work related space, is when you have to make a decision and you're looking at data, right? You're looking at a spreadsheet or I'm just trying to think of like random things that people send to me when I have to make decisions.
Right.
If you're looking at the options in front of you and you have some
Hiring
data,
decisions.
yeah, take a minute and think about what your gut says. Just go, okay, if I had to make this decision without this information, what would I do? Right? If I didn't have the data, if someone said, hey, you just did 3 interviews. Hey, we have 3 interviews, you have to pick one. you don't have time. And I think it's always good to give someone like no time to figure it out, because that is usually when instinct will kick in, because it has to, right? You're like,
Yeah, they don't have a
it.
choice.
Yeah, you don't get to go back and pull their resumes. You don't
No.
get to write your pros and cons out. You don't get to look at the job description and check the box of like, this person does this thing and this person. You don't get to do any of that. You had the conversation, you had an experience with these people without looking at anything else. Who would you pick? And now go back and take a look at all the logic behind it. And like, don't try and look for the data that supports the decision you already made. Don't do that. But go through and then make that logic decision and then compare, right?
Yep.
This versus, and then in that comparison, you're starting to understand what your intuition is. And so you can uncover biases, which is great. You can uncover stereotypes, which are incredibly negative, usually, right?
Yep.
And then you can also understand, like, what does my experience tell me about people and situations and experiences? And so you start to just gather more of that qualitative lens to decision making. I think if you practice, like, if I just had to make a decision right now knowing nothing, what would I do? I think just don't do it, but consider it. Consider what that answer is sometimes. Because I think you'll start to trust yourself. And I think that's a lot of times why people don't rely on intuition, is they don't trust it. They don't take any time to trust themselves.
Yeah. All right. So for our listeners, it's going to be about pausing to acknowledge that, right? Like pausing to acknowledge any feelings that are coming up in situations where our intuition just starts to speak up, right? Like I feel like for me, it comes right through my stomach and up through my chest. That's how I feel it. And I don't know why I feel it that way, but it's not through my head. It's not through my feet. I feel it right in my stomach. It comes right up through my chest. When that happens, acknowledge it. All right, good. First tip. Second tip is practicing, right? Taking like every opportunity to practice. We don't actually have to make the decisions based upon that. But if you were to play that devil's advocate game with yourself and be like, what would I do if I could not gather any more information, right? Because even though you're like gathering more information, that's also a waste of a company's dollars too. So like I can hire people really, really, really fast because I've been practicing this skill for years of just learning people and understanding people. And so you're probably going to save a business money and hopefully get promotion opportunities, but like being able to practice that intuition to say, all right, what would I do if, and you don't have to make the decision then, but being able to be aware of it, so acknowledge it, and then be able to practice it once or twice in a day is, I feel like, powerful and could be life-changing for people.
And reality is, at the end of the day, there's always going to be more information you could go get.
Yes, always.
You can't do that for every decision you make. You can't constantly be chasing more and more and more information.
Things full of information, full of ways to make us feel busy and think that we have to logic our way out all the time.
Yeah, at some point you have to really learn how to trust yourself, learn how to make decisions quickly, and then just really lean into honoring the usually decades worth of information that's just housed within you. So it makes you special.
I love it. Ryann, thank you so much for being with us today on Life is Better with You in It, because life really is better with you in it. And you are affecting so many women leaders and you're doing really big things in the world. So I'm happy you're here.
Thanks for having me. And I miss your face. And one of these days I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to drive down and hang out with you in person.
In person. Please, let's have some mimosas.
10 mimosas.
Like that. That too. We'll get a driver.
Absolutely. I love it.
All right. To all my listeners today, life is better with you in it. And we're just happy you're here. Have a great one.